Final days will be marked by chaos, violence, and destruction beyond imagining. But only recently have scientists been able to come up with their own apocalyptic scenarios. We're taking you on a journey that's both breathtaking and terrifying. Top scientists from around the world will paint riveting pictures of 7 deadly threats, from the least likely to the most imminent. Some are not likely to happen in our lifetime, but they could wipe out future generations. And by acting today, we could dramatically change our ability and that of our children and grandchildren to survive.
The largest threat that humanity faces is...
The greatest threat to humanity is...
The largest threat to humanity now would be terrorism.
Nuclear bombs.
Probably a virus.
Waste of natural resources.
It could be an asteroid, a comet, gamma rays. The end of the world is possible.
It's more than possible. It's likely, but the question is when and how.
Scientists say in 10 billion years, our sun will die, and so therefore will we. Of course, stars die every day, and that's where we begin our countdown at number 7. Sometimes when stars perish, they unleash the most powerful force in the universe, a radioactive light brighter than 1,000,000 trillion suns. Imagine if that power were unleashed upon us.
Not enough people take pause and reflect on our true place in the cosmos. We like to think of ourselves as having power over our fate. No, not yet, at least. The powers of the universe vastly exceed any powers we wield.
The power of nuclear gamma radiation has long been thought of as mankind's deadliest weapon. But in the early 1970s, American scientists discovered that the power was not man's alone. While searching for evidence of Soviet nuclear testing, NASA's spy satellites began sending back readings of abnormally high radiation, far greater than any bomb the U.S. had ever seen. Scientists immediately tried to pinpoint where on the planet the blasts were originating.
But to their astonishment, they found that these bursts of gamma rays were not coming from the Earth, but were coming from space. Completely unexpected.
Scientists trained their satellites on the cosmos and started searching for the source of what they now call gamma ray bursts.
Gamma ray bursts are fascinating, cosmic enigmas. They are the most energetic things we have ever seen or measured.
These are the biggest explosions the universe has seen since the Big Bang itself. It's as massive, essentially, as an explosion can be.
Gamma ray bursts occur in a few milliseconds to several hundreds of seconds, and during that time, the energy they put out is actually more energy than the whole universe in the same period of time.
A gamma ray burst is the final collapse of a star. Every piece of the star is simply falling toward the center all at once. It gets incredibly dense, it gets incredibly hot, all sorts of nuclear reactions start to happen, radiation starts spewing out all over the place. It's just a maelstrom.
We see about one a day, going off in some galaxy somewhere in the cosmos. These gamma rays are at safe distances. They're just cosmic curiosities in the night. But suppose a gamma ray burst happened nearby, in our own galaxy. I don't want to be around for that day.
Because gamma ray bursts travel at the speed of light, towns around the globe would have no warning that a cosmic disaster was about to unfold.
If a gamma ray burst bursts, it'll be the brightest thing in the night or day sky. Won't be one sun in the sky, you'll see 2 suns. You'll know something bad is happening.
Although the closest star to the Earth that could explode is 8,000 light years away, even at that distance, a burst headed toward Earth would be catastrophic.
What it would do is it would boil off, essentially, the whole top of the Earth's atmosphere. And the consequences of that are very drastic.
First thing they'll do is take out our ozone layer. Completely take out all the ozone. Once you do that, by the way, the ozone is our defenses against high energy radiation. So if that shield gets knocked out, we are bare.
Without the protection of the ozone layer, everyone around you, even those hiding in their basements, would begin to get what looked like a bad sunburn from the gamma radiation as it penetrated into the Earth's crust.
This is light, has enough energy to completely decompose the molecules that are the stuff of life.
Temperatures would rise dramatically. People outside would be burnt by the ultraviolet radiation. Without an ozone layer, anything with eyes would eventually be blinded. We're talking about the end of all life as we know it.
Within days, the radiation would begin to impact every living thing on a molecular level, stopping all cells from reproducing. Our fingernails and hair would stop growing, and worse, the cells in our intestines would stop regenerating, leaving us unable to absorb food or water.
Most of the living things on the planet, plants and animals alike, would not survive that kind of radiation.
After 1 month, almost all life would be gone from the face of the Earth. However, the remnants of our civilization, the buildings, cars, street lamps, would remain intact.
If any life survives a nearby explosion of a gamma ray burst, it would be the microbes that live deep under Earth's surface. There's some hope that life on Earth would continue, but bacteria will rule the world.
He's been called the most brilliant mind in physics since Albert Einstein. Who better to help guide us on our journey than Stephen Hawking, who has devoted his life to discovering the secrets of the universe. Professor Hawking suffers from Lou Gehrig's disease. He cannot speak. The only way he can communicate is by blinking his eyes, and that takes a while, so we sent him our questions last week, and we can hear his answers now with the help of a computer-generated voice. Professor Hawking, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. It's really been interesting to get your feedback. The universe, as you know, is a vast and powerful place with forces we're only now beginning to understand. Some of them, like gamma ray bursts, though extremely unlikely, are still capable of destroying our entire planet as well as us. What do these phenomena tell us about humanity's place in the universe?
Events like a nearby cosmic ray burst would be devastating to life on Earth, but they haven't happened in the 4.5 billion year history of the Earth so far, so the chance of them occurring in the near future is very low. The Earth is in much more danger from human action than from natural disasters.
Next, a story that will really suck you in.
What will your body do in response? Your body will begin to stretch.
Your feet would be ripped off of your body, followed by your legs, torso, etc.
You're 1 piece, 2 pieces, 4 pieces, 8 pieces, 16, 32, 64. Not only will you not escape, light can't escape.
Now we move from the brilliant light of gamma ray bursts to the heart of darkness, the second deadly force created when a star dies. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner sucking in anything that crosses its path. Could that be us?
If you look at textbooks from 100 and 200 years ago, they describe the universe as being this peaceful, gentle place. We have come to learn that the universe has no shortage of ways it can kill us.
One of the cosmos' deadliest threats is invisible, travels thousands of miles an hour, and devours everything in its path, a black hole.
Voracious is one of the best terms to use in describing a black hole. Anything that comes within their gravitational grip will fall in and will be consumed and turned into more black hole.
You shoot a nuclear weapon right into a black hole and it wouldn't even notice. It would be smaller than a pinprick compared to the enormous gravitational pull of the black hole itself.
Scientists first discovered black holes in the 1970s and since then have found tens of thousands of them scattered across the universe. Like a gamma ray burst, they're the death throes of a massive star, but with very different results.
Stars, as we come to know and love them, are these balls of gas that are neither shrinking nor expanding. They're in balance. Gravity wants to make them smaller, but the heat created by fusion in the core prevents that from happening. But what happens if the nuclear fuel runs out in the center? Then the star begins to cool. And when it cools, it no longer has the ability to sustain itself against the gravity. And the gravity wins and collapses the star.
When a star that was millions of miles across compresses itself down to the size of a single atom, it creates a massive gravitational pull.
The gravity is so strong that no matter your speed, if you try to ascend from this zone, its gravity will pull you right back in. Not only will you not escape, light can't escape. Its gravity is that strong.
Initially, scientists thought we had nothing to fear because black holes were stationary.
Then in the year 2000, all hell broke loose. At that point, we had conclusive evidence that there are wandering black holes, nomads, renegades, right next to us in our own backyard of the galaxy.
But luckily, so far, none of them seem to be heading our way.
It would be a bad day for the solar system if we got visited by a black hole. A contest between a black hole and the Earth, Earth would just lose. It's that simple.
If a black hole did wander into our cosmic neighborhood, the first indication would be subtle changes in the night sky.
The first thing you notice is that the orbits of the outer planets are a little disturbed by the existence of this black hole. Then they would become more disturbed and more disturbed.
Let's imagine that it's coming in at, say, 20 or 30 or 40 kilometers per second, about the velocity with which stars move through the Milky Way. Then it's going to take a few decades to move across the solar system. So we'd have, 20, 30, maybe 100 years warning, something like that, that we had a serious problem.
Within days of discovering the black hole, scientists would be able to tell us when and how we were going to die. Because the black hole would wreak havoc across the solar system, there would be no escape.
It would be very much like seeing a predator come in to your village and not being able to do anything.
As the black hole got closer to Earth, its gravity would begin to cause dramatic changes on the planet.
The tidal effects on Earth are going to be extreme. The tides on Earth are not going to be feet high or tens of feet high, but they're going to be miles high, and so the oceans will wash over the continents, and that probably would do in most people on Earth.
If there were survivors, they would be huddled on the remaining patches of high ground.
The psychological effects on everyone would be pretty bad. You know that it was over, that basically our existence on Earth as we knew it was over.
In the planet's final years, the black hole would begin to affect the Earth's orbit, causing winter's temperatures to plummet and summers to be unbearably hot.
When you finally get close enough for the black hole's gravity to start dominating the gravity of the Earth, then you start hearing the sucking sound as the atmosphere is sucked off through space towards the black hole, followed by everything that isn't nailed down on the surface of the Earth.
What will your body do in response? Your body will begin to stretch. Now, the body's kind of elastic. You can stretch a little bit. That's what you do before you work out. You stretch. So it might even feel good at first. But then the difference in force of gravity will continue to grow. And there'll be a point where it will become decidedly uncomfortable for you.
Your feet would be ripped off of your body, followed by your legs, torso, etc.
You're 1 piece, 2 pieces, 4 pieces, 8 pieces, 16, 32, 64, and you bifurcate your way all the way down to the singularity. I think if you gotta go, that's gotta be fun. If I were to pick a way to die cosmically, that would be the way to do it, for sure.
If I knew that the world was going to come to an end, I would travel all over the world.
Swim in the ocean.
Spend more time with the grandchildren.
I'll probably cry a lot. Party like there's no tomorrow.
I'd make a short list immediately of like all the things that I haven't done that I want to do. And I'd just start at the top and just cross them off one by one.
I would go probably back to my country and take my family with me.
I'd make sure that my family was with me. My whole family.
I definitely want to see my family one more time.
See my family?
My family.
My family.
My family.
My family.
My family.
When we continue, what could happen if you take a super intelligent machine, let it make its own decisions, then connect it to the world's deadliest weapons?
That's one of the major risks, that if we produce these godlike creatures, they may turn against us.
We've given machines too much power, too much intelligence, and it's too late.
Coming up, number 6 on our countdown.
We live in a world where science fiction is becoming real life all the time. When many of us were growing up, computer chips and cell phones lived only in the imaginations of writers and scientists. Now we can't imagine life without them. And that is the making of number 6 on our countdown of threats to civilization. Where will technology lead us? Will catering to our convenience be the death of us?
Computers can, in principle, emulate human intelligence, or even better it. The result is that computers are likely to overtake humans in intelligence at some point in the next 100 years.
As a species, we are number 1. We're the dominant species.
How is it that we got that way? I believe it's our intellectual capabilities. So if something comes along that intellectually outperforms us, then it has the potential to take over.
Man versus machine. It is a battle that's been a staple in popular culture for all of modern times. The idea sells a lot of movie tickets, but could machines really outsmart humans? To most, it sounds like a joke.
My God! They've already mastered stairs! In a very real sense, they are stairmasters!
But some of the top scientists in the field of artificial intelligence aren't laughing. They say that massively intelligent machines could actually threaten humanity.
Will it be possible for humanity to create creatures, machines, that are so powerful, so intelligent, that there's a genuine risk they could wipe us out? Yes, definitely.
But so far, massively intelligent machines don't exist. To understand how they will become a reality, scientists say, just do the math.
The electronic capacity you can put into a chip nowadays is doubling roughly every year or so. Common sense, if you take any old number and you multiply it by 2, by 2, by 2, by 2, by 2, after a while you'll end up with a huge number, and that's the case today.
60 years ago, the world's most powerful computer weighed 30 tons. Today, a device billions of times more powerful can fit into your pocket.
So at what stage could machines start becoming smart enough to be a threat, approaching human intelligence levels, and in a sense, answering back?
Artificial intelligence has already given us computers smart enough to diagnose our illnesses, run our factories, invest our money, even beat us at chess. In 1997, a supercomputer named Deep Blue was able to defeat humanity's best chess player, Garry Kasparov.
Kasparov, after the move C4, has resigned.
I see the potential of these machines becoming not just like double human intelligence, or 5 times or 10 times, but literally trillions of times, and that's a big problem.
The more advanced our technology becomes, the more control we give it. Where will it stop?
What it is really is humans giving up the power, giving up the ultimate decision-making to the machine, and then, in the military sense, one can see the power to do something about those decisions.
The military has already developed a stable of unmanned vehicles still controlled by humans, but the eventual goal of the military is to create a technology which will give machines the power to make life or death decisions on their own.
We're setting up machines to do things to humans, and not particularly pleasant things to humans in many cases. I think if they just had a small fraction of humanity in them, machines, then they're going to be awful.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
In 1968, director Stanley Kubrick gave us the HAL 9000, a super-intelligent computer known affectionately as HAL.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
In a high-tech version of self-defense, HAL takes charge and outsmarts and kills some of the astronauts.
That's one of the major risks, that if we produce these godlike creatures, they may turn against us.
The astronauts were able to turn HAL off, but what if a computer like HAL was connected to millions of other computers?
They would virtually be in control of everything, our economy, our medical systems, our water, whatever. So if they took it into their heads to, if they had heads, whatever, into their intelligences to exterminate us, I don't see that being a major challenge for them.
Scientists say it would be just like a scene out of the science fiction film The Terminator, only this time life would imitate art.
In 1 hour, it will initiate a massive nuclear attack on its enemy.
What enemy? Us! Humans!
It's like walking towards a sheer drop on a cliff face and saying, yeah, let's put some more intelligence into machines. Everything looks all right. And in the end, we just fall off the cliff. We've given machines too much power, too much intelligence, and it's too late.
Coming up, underneath Yellowstone National Park, there is a force that has the power to plunge the world into darkness.
That's an event of I guess, what you'd call biblical proportions. There'd be men's hearts failing for fear. I think there'd be sheer panic.
Global harvest failure, global famine. It would be every man for himself.
Next, the number 5 threat on our countdown.
Number 5 on our countdown is a threat closer to home. In fact, don't look up, look down, because what lies beneath could really rock your world.
There's no doubt, and many people have said this before, but we exist on this planet purely by nature's consent. If nature decides she's had enough, we're out.
Many of the threats we face come from above. However, only one comes from beneath. What we think of as solid ground, the Earth's crust, is only 25 miles deep, and beneath that is a pressurized ocean of molten rock looking for a way out. Occasionally, it finds one. Case in point, Pompeii, on the Bay of Naples in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius.
What Vesuvius tells us and what Pompeii tells us is that the worst thing that you could conceive from an active volcano will ultimately happen.
August 24th, 79 AD. It started with earthquakes. Hours later, there was a massive explosion.
We use the word erupt in our everyday language to describe something that happens suddenly and unexpectedly. Vesuvius erupted into their lives.
An entire city frozen at the moment of destruction. The people who died buried in ash, a testament to the frightening power of the blast.
But you've only got to look at the dead of the Herculaneum waterfront, where the skeletons, when they've been studied, you can see there are scorch marks on the inside of the skull, where the gas cloud came down. It was so hot that it set the brain on fire. And the gases then had to break out from the skull to be released. That's the power locally of something like that, and that's tiny compared to the most modest supervolcanic eruption.
A supervolcano really is a volcano which generates the biggest eruptions that we know about. Now, that means something big enough, for example, to cover the entire UK or the entire state of Connecticut, I suppose, in a vast amount of debris, sort of 10 metres deep. Mount St Helens looked spectacular, looked devastating, killed around about 60 people, destroyed about 600 square kilometres or so of forest with this lateral blast, as we call it. The whole north side of the volcano came out. So it looked like a huge eruption. A super eruption is at least 1,000 times bigger than that.
Unlike regular volcanoes, supervolcanoes are massive canyons called calderas, making them so big they're hard to find. Although scientists estimate there could be as many as 40 scattered around the globe, they don't know for sure. What they can tell us, if one erupts, it has the power to push humanity to the brink of extinction.
If we look at the big supervolcanic eruption about 74,000 years ago, Toba in Sumatra, we can see from the genetic records that almost immediately after the eruption, humanity went through a genetic bottleneck.
According to DNA and fossil records around the time Toba erupted, the human population dropped by at least 90%. Scientists theorize that this near extinction was caused when the ash from Toba blocked out the sun and killed almost all of the world's plant life.
There are some human geneticists who say that the bottleneck is so narrow that there could have been 30 reproducing females left in the world. The bottom line is that when one of these eruptions occurs, it's going to be a global disaster. The only question is when and where.
Rapid City, South Dakota, a peaceful town on the edge of the Great Plains. When authorities here think about catastrophes, they certainly don't think about volcanoes.
As far as disasters go, we have large forest fires, blizzards, small amount of flooding on a small scale.
Few here realize that just over 400 miles away under Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, there's an underground lake of lava that has the potential to make Rapid City look like Pompeii.
Yellowstone is a supervolcano. There's a giant magma chamber underneath Yellowstone. It's erupted in the past, and an eruption, we think, of Yellowstone is overdue.
There's no reason why Yellowstone shouldn't experience another super eruption in my lifetime. Absolutely not. The chances in any one year are very, very small, but there is no reason why that can't happen.
Yellowstone experiences a super eruption about once every 600,000 years. The last one was over 630,000 years ago, and when it went off, the prairie that today is Rapid City was buried under 8 feet of ash.
A volcano that can carry that much ash and put 4, 6, 8 feet even of ash down upon us. I mean, that's an event of I guess what you'd call biblical proportions, and I don't know how you would prepare for something like that.
It is especially hard to prepare when scientists can't tell us exactly what the warning signs are.
We haven't seen a supervolcanic eruption, so we're not sure about what we will see. But one of the things that we would expect would be increased earthquake activity, an increase in the small geyser eruptions that you get in Yellowstone.
The increased seismic activity under Yellowstone would be caused by the massive lake of superheated liquid rock called magma, forcing its way toward the surface.
When that would turn from warning signals to there's going to be an eruption is unclear. We may not, however, get much notice that the eruption's about to happen.
The Bible does say that, in the last days there'd be an increase of earthquakes in many places. It sounds a little trite, but the Bible says when you see these things happen, look up, for your redemption draws nigh.
We might only get a few minutes' notice that a series of eruptions were about to begin.
If you can imagine the chambers here, these fingers of magma are going to reach the surface, and when they reach the surface, the eruption begins. one can imagine that rather than there being one spot around Yellowstone, you may get half a dozen of these, or a dozen or more, erupting around the caldera. And as these erupt, they're emptying the magma chamber, and as the magma chamber gets empty, the roof of it becomes vulnerable. There's nothing holding it up anymore, and then that collapses into the magma chamber, and then the magma chamber is open to the outside wall. So all of a sudden, all this pressure is released, and that's when the whole thing injects itself into the stratosphere. That's when it really goes.
In Rapid City, those watching live television images from the park would suddenly see their screens go blank.
These eruptions are so big that you couldn't really see them because you couldn't be close enough to the volcano and watching it and survive. You could watch it from satellite. You could see the volcano erupt, and you can see the ash cloud begin to spread.
The explosion would incinerate everything within a 100-mile radius and send a massive cloud of poisonous ash racing across the plains. It would take less than half an hour to cover all of Wyoming and cross into South Dakota.
It is 5 hours to get across the state of South Dakota. So I'm not sure you could ever really outrun it. You would have to try to keep people inside. You'd really just try to store up.
Definitely there'd be panic. There'd be men's hearts failing for fear, for what's coming on the earth.
For emergency personnel in Rapid City, there'd be only one thing they could do as they watched the cloud engulf their town.
Say a prayer and hope for the best. You're not going anywhere, so unless you can walk fast.
Once the cloud hit, evacuation would be impossible. The drifts of ash would be over 8 feet deep and heavier than snow. The ash would be so thick that it would clog all internal combustion engines, stranding rescuers.
A scenario that puts us where we can't reach the people. I mean, that's the ultimate nightmare for somebody in my position. The answer I don't like giving is people are going to go without our assistance.
Almost immediately, anyone outside would be suffocated by the cloud of toxic sulfuric ash.
Unfortunately, if you breathe in enough of the ash, they will mix with the fluids in your lung and form a nice cement. So you're drowning in an acid bath of cement. It's a really sort of unpleasant thing to imagine, isn't it?
People inside would discover that their houses provided little protection.
If you're in any building which isn't very, very well constructed, then the amount of ash accumulating could cause the roofs to collapse, and you would die as a result of building collapse.
Those who managed to survive would have nowhere to turn. Within a week, the ash would have immobilized the entire country.
If the super eruption happens at Yellowstone, you're looking certainly at the United States beginning to fall apart. You have 2/3 of the country covered in ash. That ash is washed into the river systems. It turns to mud. It clogs the rivers. You have massive flooding right the way across the Midwest.
Planes could not fly. Trucks couldn't drive. There'd be no way to deliver food to the millions whose supplies were running out.
I think it'd be sheer panic. I think you'd see looting like you would in big city riots.
It would be every man for himself, to be honest. It would be dog eat dog. It would be what you would expect to find in a post-apocalyptic situation.
Within weeks, temperatures would begin to plummet as the sulfuric gas created by the eruption spread all the way around the globe.
Gradually, the skies would become more and more overcast worldwide. This veil of sulfur gas, which would spread out across the planet, would start to become very, very effective at cutting out solar radiation. Then you would start to see temperatures falling as this effect of solar radiation being blocked out really began to hit home.
The entire planet would be plunged into an ice age that would last for years.
It would be extremely difficult to grow crops, and we would face something like a global harvest failure, global famine.
Within months, people across the globe would begin to die of starvation.
You'd probably run out of supplies. Then you just try to make people comfortable, and you just have to be at peace.
We can only do so much with what we have, so It'd be a sad story.
If the experts are right, a year after the eruption, the only survivors would be those people who had banded together and figured out a way to grow food in this new world.
We'll have to go back 200 years to where we actually cooperate, and our focus will be entirely local, because it's only local resources that we're going to be able to exploit with any reliability for maybe a generation.
I can't see any situation where the human race is wiped out. There are just too many of us. So we will get through it, I'm sure. But I'm not quite sure what our civilization will be like when we come out the other side.
When we continue.
The universe is violent. The universe can be catastrophic.
All the conflicts around the world may all of a sudden stop because there's going to be an external threat.
This asteroid, on Friday the 13th, April 2029, will come close enough to Earth to dip below our communication satellites.
Next, number 4 on our countdown.
If you want to think of something really humbling, consider this. 99.9% of the creatures that walked the earth before us are now extinct. Some were bigger and more powerful than we are, so why did they disappear? The answer lies in number 4 on our countdown. Could their fate ultimately be ours?
When I look up at night and I see a quiet sky, all I can think of is that it's a shooting gallery with wayward asteroids that have us in their sights.
Asteroids are chunks of rock believed to be the debris left over from the birth of the planets. They can be as small as a grain of sand or as large as the state of Texas.
I'm not worried about the black hole crumbling Earth. I'm not even worried about the gamma ray burst. I'm worried about the next asteroid.
The average handgun fires a bullet at approximately 1,000 feet per second. The average asteroid travels more than 60 times faster. And when a large enough one of these cosmic cannonballs hits a planet, the effects are catastrophic.
Look at the moon. Every night it comes out to remind us that on cosmic scales, the universe is violent. The universe can be catastrophic.
There are tens of thousands of craters on the moon, and each was caused by an asteroid impact. Even more have collided with the Earth, but weather has softened the scars.
We have a polite word for them. They're the near-Earth objects. But really, these are the things that can render us extinct.
The last species to witness a giant asteroid collision didn't live to tell about it.
65 million years ago, there was a major asteroid strike just off the Yucatan Peninsula. That almost certainly was the primary cause of the extinction of the dinosaurs.
One of the few species that survived that impact were tiny scavenging rodents that live deep underground. With their main predator out of the picture, 65 million years later, those mammals evolved to take over the planet.
It's this two-edged sword. The asteroid that took out the dinosaurs enabled mammals to form whole branches of the tree of life that led to us. So, do you love the asteroids or do you hate them?
To keep us from going the way of the dinosaurs, a network of professional and amateur astronomers around the globe are combing the galaxy. They map and name every asteroid they find, and so far they've located more than 100,000.
One was discovered recently, the end of 2004. Fine, it was a new asteroid. Who cares? Until you start plugging in the orbital parameters into your computer. You plug those in and then you watch where it goes. You can project forward where you expect to find this thing in the future. You know what we found? This asteroid, on Friday the 13th, April 2029 will come close enough to Earth to dip below our communication satellites in orbit around Earth.
This asteroid called Apophis will just miss us on this go-round. However, depending on how the Earth's gravity affects its orbit, we may not be so lucky when it returns 7 years later.
Depending on exactly where it passes in 2029, there's a decent chance, small, but a very noticeable chance, 1 in a few thousand, that it will then strike the Earth in 2036, actually on April 13th again.
If Apophis does hit the Earth in 2036, the effect would be devastating. It would create a tsunami hundreds of feet high that could race across the ocean at supersonic speeds.
It's big enough to create the worst damage to life on Earth in recorded history.
While the impact could wash away large parts of California, Apophis is not big enough to wipe us out completely. And luckily, odds are we'll dodge this bullet. But scientists say sooner or later, Earth will be in the sights of a much bigger asteroid, one big enough to wipe out civilization entirely. So what is humanity doing to address this deadly threat?
The number of people worldwide who are working actively on this problem is enough to staff one shift at a McDonald's. And that's about accurate.
If we discovered tomorrow that a huge asteroid was hurtling toward Earth, the world's attention would turn toward NASA astronauts Ed Lu and Stan Love, who've developed what experts say is perhaps the best plan to save the planet.
And here's something that we have a chance to not just control, but prevent. The asteroid will miss the planet, no damage done whatsoever, if we can do this properly.
Regardless of what we see at the movies, the one thing we don't want to do is blow the thing up. All that would do is transform one big asteroid into thousands of smaller ones that could cause even more damage. Instead, these NASA astronauts say that with enough advance warning and a big enough ship, they could fly millions of miles into space, rendezvous with the asteroid, and use the ship's gravity to nudge it slightly off its deadly course.
The tiny gravitational pull between the asteroid and the spacecraft will be enough to pull an asteroid onto a new orbit so that 10 years later the asteroid misses the Earth rather than hitting it.
That's the theory anyway, but it's still just a theory. There is no spacecraft yet, not even a blueprint. If we can put their plan into action, perhaps it will save humanity. If they fail, scientists would know decades in advance the moment of impact, leaving each of us to live with the knowledge of the exact day our world was going to come to an end.
There'd probably be a lot of people who were, sort of, well, let's party. We don't have much time left. There'd be other people that say, well, I'm going to spend my time praying. There'd probably be other people who were, determined to survive and, would go and try to find some way to optimize their chances.
Even though there'd be little chance for survival, it's difficult to imagine that humanity would go down without a fight. Regardless of our chances, some would probably try to build self-sufficient communities deep beneath the Earth. As our expiration date grew nearer, governments might collapse and the money they back might become worthless. And society would have to discover a new set of rules.
I think as we get closer, as that sand of time runs out of the hourglass, it'll be much harder to enforce the rules and to continue the behavior that we had up to that time.
How would you behave if you knew the date of your death? Would you go to work, pay your bills, mow your lawn? As the final days approached, would our lives descend into chaos, or would we band together and look for something more?
I think what's going to happen is if we see this asteroid coming, and we're in a situation where we're not really sure what to do, we're going to look for love. We're going to look for understanding. We're going to kind of hold on to what we have, and for those people that have no one, they're going to frantically search for the comfort that they can have as time slowly ends.
Finally, one day, all of those left on the surface would wake up and know that it was the last day, then the last hour, and then the last minute.
I like what they always show in Hollywood. As the asteroid comes, people hear it and they look up and they see this flaming ball moving These objects are moving 10, 15 miles per second. That is hypersonic. You're not going to hear it, you're not going to see it.
It takes it a few seconds from when it first hits the top of the Earth's atmosphere to when it actually touches down. During those few seconds, it glows, not red hot, not yellow hot, white hot, getting up into violet hot. And that is so hot that if you were anywhere on Earth in the big circle of maybe 1,000 miles diameter, where you could actually see this thing coming down, the heat and light coming off of it would just burn you to death immediately. Then it hits, and it starts digging the crater. It takes a long time for a big crater to form, maybe a minute, as the Earth, what you think of as solid rock, gets splashed out by this enormous impact.
There would be massive tidal waves and earthquakes, but the worst part would be the gigantic mushroom cloud of debris that would reach all the way into space.
An asteroid that size is large enough to thrust large quantities of Earth's crust into the atmosphere.
Within as little as an hour, even people on the opposite side of the planet would begin to feel the effects of the impact.
You look up at the sky, and you might see a few shooting stars. Even as daylight, you might see a few shooting stars. Quickly thereafter, you'd see like 10,000 shooting stars per every square centimeter, or several tens of thousands per every square inch. So the entire sky, instead of just being little streaks of shooting stars, would flash up into a rosy red glow, which would look and feel like someone had shoved you into a self-cleaning oven being cleaned.
The falling debris would burn up in the upper atmosphere, creating a layer of fire that would blanket the planet. 60 miles below the surface of the Earth would spontaneously ignite into a worldwide firestorm. If there were any survivors, they would emerge to find the planet pitch black, enveloped by a thick layer of ash in the atmosphere.
After several months, it started to become possible to see again. So you'd go outside and, what you would see is an environment totally denuded of all vegetation and everything flammable. It looked like a very alien, desert-like environment.
The sulfuric ash from the firestorm would drop the ocean's pH level to that of battery acid, turning most of the Earth into an uninhabitable wasteland.
Finally, after several thousand years, the carbon dioxide returns to normal, the ocean's pH, as the acidity of the oceans has returned to normal, and now we have a planet that can again kind of support life.
And while there are some creatures in existence today that may survive to see this new world, the most powerful, humans, would have likely vanished.
This is what happened to the dinosaurs, and the consequence is that only the little insignificant shrew-like creatures, which were the ancestors of the mammals, survived at all. And we don't know which kinds of creatures crawling around amongst us are likely to survive the next such event, but it probably won't be us.
I think if I was told that an asteroid was coming to Earth and was going to wipe us out,
I think I would eat as much as I can.
I'd quit work. I would be on my knees every day praying to God.
I would see every Broadway show.
I'd love to drive Ferrari once. I would spend all my money.
I would call up Hugh Hefner and try and get into the Playboy Mansion.
I'm going to risk sounding selfish, but I'd really like to experience what it'd be like to have a child.
I'd like to have a kid.
I'd want to have kids right away.
Well, considering I've had 3 children back to back, I'd probably have a margarita.
Next, when we harnessed the power of the sun, it was perhaps our greatest achievement. But can we control what we created?
There's several ways a nuclear war could start. The most likely is by accident.
We could kill 8 billion people. There are only 6 billion on the planet.
Number 3 on our countdown.
sobering to think that nature can turn on us at any time, but in fact, we are our own worst enemy. So now we turn to the final three on our countdown, the kinds of destruction we are wreaking upon ourselves. First, we grew up fearing that nuclear war between the superpowers would annihilate us all. Today, that threat is far from eliminated.
As J. Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb, watched his creation explode over the New Mexico desert, he understood that in that one instant, man's place in the universe had changed.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
They understood what they were doing. They were unleashing a power unlike any humankind had ever had. We now had the ability not just to kill others, but to kill all other human beings.
Man now possessed a power that until then had only been found in the heart of a star.
We were literally taking a piece of the sun and duplicating it on Earth. The power that gives energy to all of the universe, we now had understood and replicated. It's an amazing achievement, but it carried with it tremendous danger, and that is the paradox. Can we control what we've created?
From the start, it was clear that we could not. In the 1950s, the Soviets and the United States built over 20,000 nuclear weapons. By the 1960s, the threat envisioned by Oppenheimer had become a reality.
Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation.
Today, it is the nuclear ambitions of terrorist groups and the intentions of India, Pakistan, Iran, and North Korea that seem to have the world's attention. Though experts say that nuclear proliferation is a huge danger, it is not, they say, the greatest threat to civilization.
Those are not the countries that I would worry about. Those are not the systems I would worry about. They're not the weapons I would worry about. I think the elephant in the room is still the fact that Russia and the U.S. have not stood down from their Cold War launch readiness.
The Russians and the U.S. still have thousands of weapons, many of them ready to launch within 15 minutes or less. This is enough to destroy both countries and, in fact, the world.
The number of weapons we have is the equivalent of 80,000 Hiroshima bombs. The bomb on Hiroshima killed 100,000 people, and we've got 80,000 of those. We could kill 8 billion people. There are only 6 billion on the planet.
In a world where Russia and the U.S. are at peace, what could set off a nuclear exchange?
There's several ways a nuclear war could start within the next decade or so. The most likely is by accident. A side misinterprets the actions of the other, thinks they've launched a nuclear attack, and they respond in kind.
The U.S., like Russia, does not have a functioning missile defense system. So if U.S. radar picked up an incoming rocket, we would have only 15 minutes to decide how to respond. The government has run simulations about what might happen under these circumstances.
We've run a lot of exercises on what happens if U.S. forces see an incoming missile, but we've never actually experienced that. In all likelihood, it would go as drilled. The incoming missile would be seen, the president would be notified, and would order a retaliatory strike. Then, all hell could break loose.
But once they see our missiles going over to strike them, they're likely to send theirs over towards us.
Experts say an exchange of just 20 missiles has the potential to transform the planet.
You set off a large number of nuclear explosions. You were going to put in the atmosphere enough debris to block off the sun's light. This would last for years.
Only 100 megatons is enough to set off a conflagration, firestorms, soot going into the atmosphere. That would destroy civilization and perhaps humanity as we know it.
This so-called nuclear winter would feel very much like the aftermath of a supervolcanic eruption or a massive asteroid impact. There is, of course, a crucial difference. This apocalypse is of our own making.
We still hold on our hands, inches away from pushing the button, the power to destroy the entire planet. It's there. It's real. It could happen. That nuclear sword of Damocles that Kennedy spoke so eloquently about still hangs over our head.
There is a possibility that the human race could go extinct, but it is not inevitable. Even after the end of the Cold War, there are still enough nuclear weapons stockpiled to kill us all several times over. Up to now, aggression has been an attribute with definite survival advantages. Now, however, it may destroy us all, by nuclear or biological war, if we cannot control our instinct by our reason.
I think the human race could go extinct.
I don't think so.
I'd like to think not.
It's definitely a possibility.
I believe that that's not going to happen. The world is just like everything else. It will come to an end.
The Romans destroyed themselves. The Greeks destroyed themselves. We're sons of that dynasty.
If people die and then all of humanity's gone, what's going to happen?
Next. They have been here for billions of years, are invisible to the naked eye, and have the power to wipe us out.
Pandemics are like earthquakes, hurricanes, and tsunamis. They occur.
You know it's just a matter of time until you have an enormous disaster, whether it's man-made or Mother Nature.
Coming up, number 2 on our countdown.
The Old Testament in the Bible says that when God wanted to show the Egyptians who was boss, he visited 10 plagues upon the land. Awful things like locusts, pestilence, and swarms of frogs and flies. As horrific as those sound, they're nothing next to number 2 on our countdown, the modern day plagues that may destroy us. And they're not sent from above.
As we go about our daily lives, few people realize that all around us are invisible creatures, ancient species that have the potential to bring our civilization to its knees.
What we've not tamed and never will be able to tame and ought not even try to tame is the microscopic world of the microbes.
Most are harmless, but some can kill us in hours. And now with modern technology, mankind has the power to make them deadlier than ever.
You know it's just a matter of time until you have an enormous disaster, whether it's man-made or Mother Nature.
The World Health Organization predicts millions could die.
11 flu outbreaks in birds just in the last month.
If left unchallenged, this virus could become the first pandemic of the 21st century.
The H5N1 strain of avian flu has been causing a worldwide panic. But why are health officials so frightened? For the answer, experts say you only have to look back 90 years.
In 1918, we had one of the greatest pandemics ever to hit Homo sapiens. It wiped out perhaps 40 million people. More than that died from World War I.
The flu hit some cities so hard the dead bodies overflowed from the morgues. Caskets were lined up in the streets.
We had little caskets for the little babies that stretched for 4 and 5 blocks.
This global tragedy was caused by a flu that killed less than 3% of the people who caught it. Experts say the current avian flu could be many times more lethal, and that it has the potential to be the deadliest pandemic mankind has ever seen. And even if we dodge this bullet, another deadly disease will surely emerge. In fact, experts say we are overdue.
Pandemics are like earthquakes, hurricanes, and tsunamis. They occur. There have been 10 of them in the last 300 years. We know we're going to have more in the future.
one of which just might be capable of being a true, massive, catastrophic pandemic that circulates the world and takes out very considerable percentage of the global population.
But as lethal as Mother Nature can be, today man can be much more deadly.
See, Mother Nature can be terribly harsh, and H5N1, pandemic flu, could just be extraordinarily devastating to our society. However, from my military background, I would probably still say the one that scares me the most is man-made, because it's a thinking enemy.
We have used germs as weapons for centuries. In the 1300s, Mongol armies catapulted plague-infected corpses over the enemy's city walls. In the 1700s, the British gave smallpox-infected blankets to Native American tribes. And then by the Cold War, we were able to take germs to a whole new level.
They wanted agents which would kill more people, which would kill people easier, which would have severe symptoms and so on.
Sergei Popov headed genetic engineering projects in the former Soviet Union's bioweapons program. He says it is possible to take smallpox, one of the greatest natural killers, and engineer it to be the ultimate weapon.
A typical smallpox kills 30% of infected people. The re-engineered smallpox would differ from this. I believe it would kill 100% of people.
The revolution in biotechnology has made germ engineering cheaper and easier than ever. There are now tens of thousands of people with the expertise needed to build a new virus, and the number grows by the thousands each year. What's more, the instructions and the formulas are available on the internet.
We lived for many decades under the threat of nuclear annihilation. Fortunately, there were a very limited number of people who had their finger on the button. The question then becomes, what happens when you give that button to everyone on the planet? I think it's probably fair to say that the button will get pressed.
You might ask, who would want to do such a thing? But history teaches us there are always a few people who, if they had the ability, might want to try.
Some people have said, thank God Ted Kaczynski was a mathematician and not a biologist.
In most situations, it's not about money, it's not about revenge, but it's about belief.
What would happen if someone took a deadly disease like Ebola, made it as contagious as the common cold, and then released it? Somewhere out there in a secret lab, a highly trained individual bent on destruction could be plotting mass murder on a global scale.
Let's say you're a very sophisticated genetic engineer who, for whatever reason, thinks that it's morally justifiable, or that even that there's a mandate for you to create a superbug, and you decide you want something that has the hemorrhagic capacity of Ebola to make people bleed out, is as infectious to human beings as a common cold, and you set out with that as your mission, and you create such an organism.
If a contagious germ like this could be made, then how would you spread it? No crop dusters or tainted food would be needed. It could start with just one infected person and be set loose, simply with a sneeze.
The best way to move a disease is probably an infected person incubating something. You don't have to worry about breaking the vial.
They would select places.
Gets out, in today's world, it would be practically impossible to stop. The infection would start in a single place, one village, one town, or one city.
We will pick that up probably in the first days. There are some who believe we can stop it there by moving certain drugs in.
We have this incubation period for pathogens that can go from 3 days to 3 weeks before you have symptoms. Much of your society is going to be infected before you ever know it.
With air travel and transport, it'll be around the globe within days or weeks.
As news broke that people were dying of an incurable infectious disease, many government leaders might close their borders and international travel might grind to a halt.
All of this would be very much in our face, on the news, in the newspaper.
First, there's going to be mass panic. People getting on the telephones, calling people to find out if there's anyone selling any kind of pill, any kind of gas mask.
And with no way to stop the spread of infection, it would be in our backyard, in days.
Now imagine it's Kansas City, and you're comfortably in your home in Chicago, watching it on TV and thinking, it's coming. It's going to be here in Chicago.
If you knew an incurable deadly disease was spreading in your neighborhood, how would you survive? Would you go to the supermarket for food, ride the subway, or take the bus? How would you react if a person near you began to cough?
You're going to be constantly bombarded with the thought, I might die, I might get infected, and that person that just passed me might be the one.
The gut-wrenching challenge of holding a child in your arms who's dying of something for which there is no help would be overwhelmingly difficult.
Hospitals would be overrun with the dying and the dead, and hopes would surely turn to scientists who would be racing to find a cure. Right now, it can take 6 months to make a vaccine, if one can be made at all. By then, billions could already be dead.
We might get the solution eventually, but not fast enough.
Yet whether it's a lethal new influenza or a man-made synthetic disease, modern medicine will still be our best hope for survival.
The biotechnical revolution is without question a dual-edged sword. We're going to see enormous advances in biotechnology in the next decade. The unfortunate side is, to virtually all of that biotechnology, there's a dark side.
Most of the threats we face come from the progress we have made in science and technology. The number is likely to increase in the future with the development of new technologies and new ways things can go wrong. Although the chance of a disaster to planet Earth in a given year may be quite low, it adds up over time and becomes a near certainty in the next 1,000 or 10,000 years.
Coming up, the #1 threat to life on Earth.
We see springtime coming 2 weeks earlier. We see less snow in the mountains.
More powerful windstorms, extreme precipitation events. Pretty every year now is hotter than the previous year.
Temperatures have hit dangerous levels from St. Louis to Memphis and from Raleigh to New York.
If we go down a business as usual course, we're really talking about a different planet.
We've survived cosmic calamities, terrestrial terrors, and microscopic menaces. Now it's time to face the #1 threat, and it's not the stuff of science fiction. It's happening as we speak. There's widespread scientific agreement that this is the most immediate threat to life as we know it. Meet the enemy.
I'm Dick Williams from Kansas City. I'm a trucker, and I've noticed in my driving now that I'm seeing armadillos, places where I've never seen them before, much farther north than I've ever seen them in the past. Why the armadillos are moving north, I don't actually know the answer to that.
My name is Barbara Levine. I'm a retired elementary school teacher. Well, this was the plant that meant the most to me. This Japanese anemone was always very important to me because I knew that as soon as that bloomed, it was time to pack up and get ready to start teaching again. And now here it is, the middle of July, and it's blooming. I don't understand it. I know that something is not quite right.
Around the country, people are noticing subtle changes in their backyards, slight variances in the natural world that have climate experts concerned.
We see springtime coming 2 weeks earlier. We see less snow in the mountains. We see heavier rainfall. We already see 8 inches of sea level rise.
The planet is changing before our eyes, and it's going to have big practical sociological impacts which we don't understand yet, but we can see that they're going to be big.
Some of the environmental trends that are disturbing scientists are hard to notice, but others are far less subtle.
The average number of Category 4 and 5 hurricanes that we see each year globally has nearly doubled. in the last 30 years. We're seeing more forest fires. We're seeing Greenland melting faster than we thought, West Antarctic melting faster than we thought. That's all bad news, and it is all happening at once.
Add it all up, and scientists agree that what we are seeing is the beginning of a planetary climate shift that has potentially dire consequences for life on Earth.
Global warming is a misnomer. Climate change now is used because it's not just the rise in temperatures, it's everything else around it. The more powerful windstorms, extreme precipitation events, more flooding, sea level rise, everything else. It's not just warming, it's this whole portfolio of hazardous phenomena that we're going to have to face.
Every top accredited scientific institution, from the EPA to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to the National Academies of Science and even the Pentagon, agree on three things. 1, climate change is real. 2, we humans are spurring it on. And 3, left unchecked, it has the potential to escalate into the largest global catastrophe mankind has ever known.
Scientists can never be certain. That's one of our weaknesses, as you well know. But the probability of this changing the Earth beyond recognition is so high that any practical, reasonable person would treat it as if it were a certainty.
I think this threat of human-induced global warming is largely manufactured. I don't think it is real.
Does global warming exist, or is this just a liberal scare tactic?
There's no scientific consensus about what causes global warming or how it will affect our lives.
I find it extraordinary that anybody can regard global warming as climate change as a debate. Clearly it isn't a debate.
There's no credible debate about whether it's warming and about whether it's because of human activity. That's very clear.
You have the entire climate science community pretty much on one side, and on the other side you have what must now be half a dozen mavericks who are pretending it's not happening.
It's a hoax.
A total hoax.
Total hoax. It's an outrageous lie.
Every time you address the Holocaust, you don't bring somebody in that says it didn't happen. And we're at that stage now. We have Holocaust deniers, we have climate change deniers. And to be honest, I don't think there's a great deal of difference.
Is there any doubt among scientists that global warming is occurring, that it's dangerous, and that humans are causing it to happen?
No, the debate is over.
Since losing his bid for the White House, former Vice President Al Gore has been spending most of his time on this issue, in the press, on the page, and even in your local theater.
I am Al Gore. I used to be the next president of the United States of America.
Gore says this isn't the first time we've seen the interests of big business come into conflict with such a widespread scientific consensus.
The illusion of a debate has been purchased with millions of dollars a year spent by a few of the largest and least responsible polluters who want to fool and confuse the American people.
Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
It's exactly the same thing that the tobacco companies did after the Surgeon General's report provided an end to the debate over smoking in health, and yet for decades they were able to purchase these quasi-scientists who would say things for money.
Well, can you say that you don't believe, or there is no conclusive proof that cigarettes are harmful?
I would say that.
Today, everyone knows that cigarettes are highly addictive and can cause cancer, but many believe the cause of global warming has been obscured by a disinformation campaign waged by some of the big coal and oil companies. However, it is no secret among scientists what is responsible: a gas in our atmosphere known as carbon dioxide. But what's so bad about CO2? Carbon dioxide is the most prevalent of the so-called greenhouse gases. That's the part of our atmosphere that traps the sun's rays, allowing only about 30% of the sun's heat to escape back into space. Without our natural cozy blanket of CO2, most of the sun's heat would escape, and our planet would literally freeze over. On the other hand, if you added too much carbon dioxide, the atmosphere would absorb more and more heat until the Earth began to resemble Venus. average temperature 900 degrees Fahrenheit. By analyzing ancient Arctic ice samples, scientists have been able to track both the temperatures and the CO2 levels going back thousands of years. This data shows periods of natural warming and cooling, but one trend is indisputable. Whenever the carbon level rises, the temperature rises as well. Fast forward a few 100,000 years to 1900, when in the middle of one of those natural warm periods, something changed. Mankind suddenly started producing massive amounts of CO2.
Today, as your program airs, we in human civilization will put up into the atmosphere of the Earth more than 70 million tons of carbon dioxide, or global warming pollution.
In one day?
In one day. Every single day.
As it has for millions of years, the planet's temperature is following the carbon dioxide level, but this time into uncharted territory.
If we look back over the last 20 years or so, 15 or thereabouts of the hottest years on record have been over that period. Virtually every year now is hotter than the previous year.
In the nation's capital, 100 degrees with humidity feels like 113. Temperatures have hit dangerous levels from St. Louis to Memphis and from Raleigh to New York.
The first half of 2006 was the hottest ever recorded, and scientists agree that because of the CO2 already in the air, it will get hotter for at least another several decades. While that's very bad for us, it will be devastating for creatures like the penguin and the polar bear, whose habitat is literally melting away beneath their feet.
We're wiping out, because of our polluting activities, vast numbers of species, even before they've been discovered. I mean, things like that, species like the polar bear have had it. There's no chance. I cannot see how they can survive.
We could have as much as 50% or more of the animals and plants on the planet go extinct if we go down the path of business as usual.
New data shows that the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheet are melting faster than anyone expected. Each holds over 600 quadrillion gallons of water and has the potential to cause a dramatic rise in sea level.
A year ago, it was thought that it would take 1,000, maybe up to 3,000 years for the Greenland ice sheet to melt. But research undertaken and published in just the last 12 months shows that the rate of melting, the rate of movement of the glaciers is accelerating so much that it could melt within a couple of centuries.
And some scientists believe that if we do not act immediately, it could be much sooner.
It could be 100 years from now, or it could be a few decades from now. And if you get even a significant fraction of that in the next half century, it's going to be big sea level changes.
If the Greenland ice sheet melts entirely, that's 20 feet of sea level rise. If the West Antarctic ice sheet collapses into the sea, that's another 20 feet of sea level rise. If both of those happen, 40 feet of sea level rise.
I think scientists perhaps have not made clear just how serious the problem is. If we go down a business as usual course, we're really talking about a different planet.
When we return, a glimpse into the world of 2100 if global warming goes unchecked.
It would wipe out a lot of civilization as we know it.
The most dangerous threat posed to humanity now, and in the immediate future, and I say immediate, I mean the next 50 years, 100 years, is global warming.
Global warming.
Global warming.
Global warming.
Changing weather.
1 week is really cold, the other week is really warm.
Floods in places where they haven't experienced floods.
94 degrees in March.
I mean, what more do we need to see before we actually start thinking about it in more concrete terms?
What has to happen before people say, hey, it's happening now, we better do something?
We're supposed to be good stewards of what we've got, and I don't think we have been.
There's no stopping what we're doing to the planet.
The human race might blow it.
Humanity might not act in time.
And we'll have to say we did it to ourselves.
In the winter of 2005, scientists made a frightening discovery. Increasing global temperatures were causing the Greenland ice sheet to melt at an alarming rate. With the help of satellite.
You're talking about hundreds of millions of refugees. I mean, that's huge. I mean, I think it's impossible to imagine a strain
It is.
on the system quite that big.
It really is. We have seen what happened when 100,000 people were displaced from New Orleans and the Gulf Coast communities. And it's difficult to imagine a couple of 100 million.
You're going to see mass migrations on a biblical scale. Obviously, the movement of people into new areas and the social ramifications of that are going to cause real problems.
As an estimated 1 billion people worldwide are forced inland by rising waters, the remaining habitable land will ironically be gripped by a different kind of water crisis.
In the West, 75% of the water comes from snowpack. We're going to lose that snowpack. We've built up cities, huge cities, that depend totally on that water.
With the planet's fresh water in short supply, it would become increasingly difficult to grow crops, setting off a worldwide food shortage, igniting a new set of crises.
The United Nations identifies something like 150 flashpoints where wars may be fought over water.
War, famine, and drought, coupled with an unstable climate system, could push the death toll into the billions.
This is a level of disaster that the world has never seen. The future is by and large in our hands. We can choose between a modest warming and a radical warming.
The generation now alive, the generation that you see looking around you for the first time in history, is the generation that controls the destiny of the planet itself. And unless we are careful, our children and grandchildren may say to us that we ruined everything.
I think the greatest tragedy in the universe would be to realize that we have enough intellect and enough technology to save ourselves from a killer asteroid, but not enough intellect to save us from ourselves.
If we're smart enough to go to the moon, if we're smart enough to build the internet, we really ought to be smart enough to stop global warming.
Reducing carbon dioxide output is not rocket science. The technology needed for cleaner engines, efficient power, and sustainable development exists on the shelf today.
We're driving cars that get 20 miles to the gallon. They could be getting 80. That could save 3/4 of the oil we use in our cars. So there's so much that we can do. That's really simple.
In order to get the Earth's climate back on track, each of us individually and as a nation will need to learn how to meet our food, transportation, and electricity needs without filling the air with CO2. While cities like Portland, Oregon have made great strides in reducing emissions, and various states have introduced legislation to help reduce CO2, the problem has yet to be addressed on a national scale.
The public is not stupid. You know, they're willing to do things, but they need to know what has to be done. So we've got to level with the public, and we're not doing that.
It's not a partisan issue. Serious people in both parties want to move forward to start putting in place a framework for changing the way we do business, changing the way we use energy, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels.
We haven't even tried to live sustainably yet, and that's what we will have to do. That's the lesson we have to take from this crisis that we're in.
But even if we find the political will to make the necessary changes in the United States, I mean, what about China and India? China's putting a new coal plant online every single week. So even if we change, if the rest of the world isn't doing it, what good is it going to do?
In order to convince China and India to help solve this problem, we have to provide leadership, moving first and gaining moral authority to require the others to join.
It's obviously not going to be easy, but I think it is possible. And I think that the reason it's possible is because when we look at the alternative, it's unfathomable. To allow ourselves to destroy the world as we know it is unfathomable, so we have to do what it takes to fix it.
We have to reverse global warming urgently, if we still can. The Earth is in much more danger from human action than from natural disasters. This is not a prediction of doom, but a wake-up call. We have to recognize the dangers and control them. I am an optimist, and I believe we can.
We live on a very tiny planet orbiting an average star in a massive galaxy, and remarkably, we're the only creatures that we know of that have started to unlock the secrets of the universe. Whether it is part of a grand design or just luck, it is amazing that we are here thinking about our future. The speed of change has been so incredible. Our curiosity, our ingenuity, and technology have brought us to a crossroads. Unless we get hit by some cosmic bus, most of the serious problems we face we can cope with and survive. We have the power to shape our future. The question is, will we? I'm Elizabeth Vargas. Thanks for watching.
I think every start has an ending. One day you are burning, the other days you are growing up. One day you should say goodbye.
There's always doomsayers, and I'm not one.
I guess I'm a glass half full kind of person.
If
But they had lunatics before, and they'll probably have lunatics after.
I don't spend my days worrying about the end of days.
Well, I want the next generation, like my kids, to be able to live in a safe world.
Well, why should I be afraid? I can't do anything about it.
People in general and nations and I think the world come together in the time of challenge and difficulties.
We're on this rock and we're floating, and we gotta work this thing out.
Let's kick the tires and light the fires.
Woo! Multiple bogeys! Woo! They got a lock on me! I'm punching out!
Like a video game, but deadlier. Dogfights, the new series. Fridays at 10 on the History Channel.
Every time!